Welcome to Althing Considered, a conversation on life and faith in heathenry, Asatru and Norse paganism from the Troth, education and service for inclusive heathenry. Welcome to Althing Considered.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Piper Perry. It is September 13th, 2024, and this is Althing Considered, brought to you by the Troth. Althing Considered is our news program where we cover stories from around the world that pertain to heathens and heathenry and let you know where we are and what we're doing. We're in the middle of pagan pride season, and we here at the Troth take these opportunities to get to know you in person. Sarenth Odinson, one of our esoteric practitioner education developers and one of the hosts of the incredibly interesting podcast, Grandfather Fire, will be at Ann Arbor Pagan Pride tomorrow, where he and his family will be doing the main ritual. I will be at Denver Pagan Pride tomorrow from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Civic Center Park. We will also be offering a virtual harvest season ritual this year. Please stay tuned for when. As a reminder from last week, Heathen Essentials meets every other Saturday and has a vibrant social community with Monday evening social chats on Facebook. For other events and appearances, please check out our website. Our first story is about our ancestors developing boat building. Physics Forum ran a story on how Neolithic Scandinavians from the pitted ware culture, or PWC, used sealskin boats to hunt and trade across the Baltic. The pitted ware culture was unusual among European marine specialized hunter-gatherer groups. While other ancient people turned to agriculture as well as fishing and hunting, the pitted ware culture kept fishing and hunting as their primary sources of food, even though agriculture had been practiced around them in Europe for over 500 years. Evidence of these boats are hard to find as they degrade quickly. Made from seal skin and seal bone and sealed with seal oil is how they believe the boats were built. And Dr. Michael Flavel and his colleagues found indirect evidence that our ancestors used these boats, including potential bone frames, rock art where the boats are depicted, seal oil, and tools in both Germany and Sweden. Our top news story tonight is about school shootings. We are not taking a position on the Second Amendment. Rather, we are giving you some resources on how to talk about school shootings and other gun violence. As school is in session in most of the world, we as parents, teachers, and extended family are understandably frightened by the loss of our most precious children. The events in Georgia last week are the latest in a long line of school shootings that we as a nation have been enduring since Columbine here in Colorado in 1992. As you put together conversations with your children or with your friends about this topic, we recommend for your children using the Children's Hospital Coping with Current Events and tips for talking about violence. And that is put out by the National Association of School Psychologists. These approaches let children talk about their feelings without overwhelming them with facts and have age-appropriate talking points to help you as parents or guardians or even aunties and uncles. If you want to start the conversation, ask your child how they feel about school shooting drills, active shooter drills that they must do in most schools. If you want to let your child start the conversation, once they have expressed their fear or distress or anger about the situation, there's a prompt that we as heathens can start with. Let us pause for a moment as we hold the students, their families, and their teachers in our hearts. We pray to Freya to bless them with love and Air to bless them with healing during this terrible time. Or whichever gods, ancestors, or spirits of place resonate for you to project calmness to your child or children. If your children seem to be having trouble coping with the newest tragedy, reassure them that they can talk to you about this anytime that they're afraid, and add anyone else they can talk to in case you're not available. Listen to your children. Listen to their concerns rather than weigh them down with your own. It's very easy for us as guardians and adults to be very frightened by this subject and project it. And when children think we're afraid, they don't want to talk to us about important things. And as far as the heathen view of violence, in the words of our Associate President, Ben Kowalski-Granick, heathens have absolutely no problem giving up their weapons and locking them up because a goddess's image is being paraded through town, or that leaving your weapons at the gates was a prerequisite for participating in Althing, or that soldiers, upon retirement, would give up their weapons as sacrifice. This is a difficult and nuanced subject, and we will be covering the heathen response to gun violence in an October episode of All Things Considered. If you have interest in being on the panel for that particular show, please drop me a line at communications@thetruth.org, and we'll make sure that your voice is heard. Our main story tonight is how we here at the Truth celebrate the harvest season. We will be discussing our different holy observances with our assistant clergy coordinator, Reverend Tim Adams. Welcome, Reverend Tim.
Hey, Piper.
Thank you for being on the show.
My pleasure.
For our audience who might not know, how many different traditions celebrate this season?
It's hard to count how many different traditions celebrate Harvest Home. It is a phenomenon both in the ancient world and even in the modern world that is celebrated by many different cultures. and in many different regions, everywhere from Europe to Africa to Asia to South America. It's called by different names and celebrated at slightly different times of year, depending on when the harvest comes in for that region. But it is basically a community celebration that's enjoyed by many different religions and many different cultures.
Fantastic. So, what deities do our people usually call upon during this time?
I think that there's several that they call upon. Of course, Freyr is the god of the harvest, is a big one. Nerthus would be another one. Jord, Thor's mother, as the representation of Mother Earth, is another deity that could be celebrated. Iduna is another one. Again, and a deity of plenty and bounty. But I don't think there's any bad one that you can call on. Thor would be another one, because Thor's spring rains bring about the harvest and, help to deliver those crops to people. So there is no one right answer to that. I think whomever you're comfortable with reaching out to thank for the harvest that we have is always appropriate.
Do people call upon their ancestors or land vitir, land whites during the season?
Oh, I think, not only ancestors, but definitely land spirits as well, because the land spirits are what's local and supporting the individual communities. And we need to be in touch with those land spirits so that we not only build a relationship with them and the land that we're on, but also a better relationship with one another and a better sense of community. It's building that relationship of trust and gratefulness for the gifts that they provide. That's, I think, really important, not only for our own spiritual development, but for the development of the community as well.
Awesome. What kinds of rituals could people do during this season?
They can be anywhere from very elaborate to very simple. Offering up a simple prayer when the last sheaf is brought in from the field, holding a bloat for particular deities in gratefulness for the harvest is another way to do it. So it can be elaborate, it can be simple, it can be whatever fits into your schedule and lifestyle, and whatever honors the gods, the goddesses, and the land spirits and ancestors, I think is really appropriate.
How can we be observant on a budget?
I saw this kind of prefigures another question I know that you have for me later on, but I think in terms of the kinds of gifts that we offer, I don't think our gods call us to impoverish ourselves in order to give thanks back to them. I think that's an important point that sets us off maybe from other religions. We're not called to give everything and sacrifice everything we have in order to honor the gods. That being said, I think that I think more is expected in terms of a gift. For those that don't have as much, though, it can be as simple as taking an apple and offering it under a tree to the land spirits and the gods and goddesses. It doesn't have to be an elaborate gift. It can be juice or wine or mead, again, representations of bounty and harvest that can be poured out as a libation to the gods and goddesses. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be elaborate. But again, if you're somebody that's been given great gifts, in order to maintain that gifting cycle, I think more is expected. For those that aren't as as bountiful in their harvests. I don't think as much as it is expected, and you shouldn't feel bad for not being able to give expensive gifts. The other thing about our gods and goddesses too is if they're asking you for expensive things, it's okay in heathenry to ask them for them to provide you the means to get them that gift, which is I think a little different too than the many of the Christian backgrounds that we came from as well. So, whatever's appropriate, whatever is within your budget, I think is acceptable to the gods and goddesses.
Okay. How would you counsel someone to be observant in a closeted faith household? Say they are either a minor or have to live with other people that are not of their faith and are not appreciative of their faith.
Right. I think, like I mentioned before, the gift of the apple under a tree, or pouring out a libation, or even leaving out a cup of coffee or drink for the land spirits to take part in. You don't have to be obvious about what you're doing, especially if you're in a difficult situation where you are a minor and your beliefs conflict with your family's traditions. You don't have to be obvious and boisterous and explicit in what you're doing. They can be more covert and more subtle. Just as long as you're offering that prayer in your heart to the gods or goddesses and the land spirits, quietly, I think they will hear what you have to say, and you don't need to be elaborate or out yourself until you're ready to at the appropriate time.
Okay. Well, and then, will we offend the gods, ancestors, whites if we don't give them good enough offerings? That's a really common question out in the internet world, the interwebs. Can I make the gods angry if I don't give them cool stuff? And you answered that very well. No, it can be something very, very small. Is there a non-physical sort of offering? Like,
I think offering prayers. One of the things I like to do, I live in the country, and so while I am not a farmer myself, I'm deeply connected with what's going on around me. As a matter of fact, there's cornfields and wheat fields and stuff all around my house. And I think by quietly offering prayers of thanks for a bountiful harvest, I think by doing other things in the community, helping out with food banks, helping out with soup kitchens, so that other folks who are not as lucky as we are can also be enriched with the harvest. It's Harvest Home is not only about building relationships with the gods and goddesses and being thankful for the gifts that you've received, but it's also about building community. In the Viking Age and in medieval times, Harvest Home, the bringing in of the harvest, was a community activity. You helped out your friends and neighbors bring in their harvests one after another, because no one family could do it all by themselves. And so this is an excellent time of year for us to get in contact and help out our communities and help build a stronger sense of community amongst ourselves and our neighbors, whether they're heathen or not. It's all about being able to come together as a community, give thanks for the gifts we've been given, and develop an appreciation for our gods and goddesses and for one another as well.
That is a wonderful aspiration. in your work as assistant clergy coordinator, and are you finding that um, the community building is going well? Is it working where you're at? Are you doing some interbridging with other interfaith work during this time? I know
But
you personally
you,
are very busy.
yeah, yeah. I haven't been able to do as much community building as I personally would like to do, um, because of school commitments and work commitments. But that's I still think there are other ways to support your community. Support your Well, one of the things that I do is support the local hospital with donations,
Nice.
especially their children's trauma unit. It's an important part of helping the overall Flint community heal and grow. I would like to personally do some more community building once my school commitments are over. But for right now, I do what I can with what I can. And I think that's true of, yeah, I think that's true of everybody else too. You know, you've got to start it within your family, that build a strong sense of community there, and reach out further and further and branch out. I know we talk in heathenry a lot about the inner yard and the outer yard, but I don't see it as a dichotomy. You're either in or you're out. I see it as a continuum. And how we interact with one another within our families, how we interact with one another as a broader community, it's part of that continuum of social interaction and growth as a human being. Because again, we come into this world helpless and needing the help of others, and I think as we become more independent ourselves, we're called upon to offer that assistance to others as well.
Oh, thank you, Reverend Tim, for your insights. I want to say I was at Reverend Tim's ordination at Trothwood in 2023, and I was very pleased and proud to be part of that gathering. I think
Well, thank you.
I think in the couple of years that I've watched you work, you do amazing things. And I really want to see what you do when you have more time. That sounds fantastic.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me on tonight, Piper. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Tim, and have a lovely weekend.
You too. Take care, everybody.
Bye. Oh, wait a minute. We have a question for you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. What was your journey like to becoming clergy?
Why you stutter out for a minute there? Can you repeat the question?
Of course. What was your journey like to become clergy?
Well, I had some previous experience in another religion prior to this. I was Roman Catholic, and I spent 3 years in Roman Catholic seminary, so I was somewhat familiar with what it would take to go down the road of formal clergy. So I think first off, from my steps as a baby heathen to now ordained clergy, has been a journey, and it's a journey that I haven't finished yet either. I'm continually learning and growing and developing as things go on. But it started with becoming familiar with heathenry itself and what it meant, and its relationship to the land and the land spirits and the gods and goddesses, understanding the importance of the gifting cycle, not only with the gods and goddesses, but with one another as well. Developing an appreciation for the role of hospitality within heathenry and how important that is. Again, hospitality is not only offered to those that you know and love, but it's offered to the stranger as well. In medieval times, there weren't things like hotels around that you could stop off at. And as a stranger, the only shelter you might find is at a stranger's house, and hope that they would treat you well and give you the things that you need to survive along your journey. And so, growing in knowledge of hospitality was really important for me. Getting a deep knowledge of the lore itself, spending a lot of time not only reading original sources like the Eddas and the sagas, but also reading secondary academic sources as well, getting familiar with the culture of the time, getting familiar with the history of the time, understanding the volatility of things happening politically and culturally during the Viking Age and after, during the late Middle Ages, I think was all important in terms of being able to develop my own understanding of what it would mean to be clergy within an organization like this. And then I think the other thing that's really important for any type of clergy, regardless of what religion, is really being in touch with the human element, being able to understand, first off, yourself deeply, and developing an appreciation for your not only your gifts but your strengths, and then using those gifts to reach out to others and to develop relationships with them. I firmly believe that if you're in a religion where you can't grow as a human being, it's not a good situation.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important for us to be able to continue to grow and develop as human beings and to rise to our fullest human potential, which also means lending a helping hand to those who aren't as advantaged as we are. So I can't stress enough that the human element is really important in any kind of development that you do as a person. And that means continuing education as well, too, about psychology and counseling, spiritual counseling. I'm not a mental health counselor and wouldn't try to go down that path, but spiritual counseling and knowing how to communicate, knowing how to de-escalate situations if you run into them, knowing how to help people who are in crisis and where to refer them to in times of trouble when things aren't going well for them. So I think it's really important as a clergy member to not only be very well versed in the lore and the ritual and the like, but also be well versed in the human side of things as well.
Oh, thank you so much, Reverend Tip. That was a fantastic answer. And thank you for your insights. Like last year, we are going to be offering virtual rights to those who want that sense of community, especially if you are solitary practicing by yourself. We tape rituals as well so that people can feel like they're part of the community, if they're thousands of miles away. And thank you, Reverend Tim. Thank you for being our guest, and have a lovely weekend.
You too. Take care, everybody.
Bye. Okay, so we're going to open up for questions from the audience. I'm actually going to ask a very specific question tonight, which is, what percentage of bigotry are we comfortable tolerating in our spaces? It is one of those questions that where I'm sure people have I'm sure people have lots of different answers to that question. I like this one, and I like this one. So if we want 0% bigotry in our spaces. How do we get there? That is a good point. Love zero, but that also means fairly continual fighting. We live in a society that's steeped in that. So, is there someone that has a different perspective on that? To accept bigotry at all is to be bigoted. And if you don't know the famous how do you get a Nazi bar, is you let a Nazi in and stay. And then all of a sudden you have a Nazi bar. So it is incredibly complicated and nuanced, and tolerate is not the same as educate, which is very true. It is not. So what kind of education would you like to see? What kind of education do you think would help you as the zero people? How do we educate in a way that won't alienate? Because that is always that's always a potential. So, how would you like that education to look? $1 million question. Yes, it is a $1 million question. And another one, which is a very good one, and comes off this: what percentage of bigotry are we willing to tolerate? Are we responsible as heathens to call in bigotry and try to course correct in our community? Accepted, sure, we're humans and people make mistakes, sometimes over and over. However, that doesn't mean we can't sit down and think about a logical response that someone will understand. A lot of messages get lost in translation. Yeah, self-education is our own responsibility. I would say, as heathens, be in the community spirit of community building, educating people, and that this is our mission, this is our church, right? The truth is a education and service, religious education and service for a community building, inclusive heathenry. So if that is our foundation, if that's a foundation that we're thinking about, then we are responsible to call in bigotry and try to course correct in our community, try to talk to people, try to educate, try to do all of those things. And we have what about those people who don't even know they're being bigoted? The people who look at a situation and saying, nothing bigoted happened there, when marginalized people are saying, yeah, it did. Oh, that is a very tough situation with nuance. And of course, when I talk about this sort of thing, I'm always talking about the nuance of it, right? Because no situation is exactly the same. Some people you like better, some people you trust more, some people you are willing to be more vulnerable with. But there is sort of the unconscious bias that's woven into all of our lives, right? Especially if we live in the Western world. And those biases are different, by the way, between Europe and the US. So I'm not going to lump our European siblings in. But for the US, we all have unconscious bias that's sort of been baked in by the society we live in. And if we don't ever think about that or self-reflective or talk about that amongst our friends or amongst our loved ones or amongst even the people that we build community with, if we don't get other perspectives on how other people live, how other people experience the world, like the difference between dominant culture saying, I don't see anything wrong with this, and marginalized people going, so much wrong with this. How do you cross that, right? How do you have those conversations? And again, education would be swell. It would be a great way to fix that. But there are some people that just don't want to change. How far do we take education? You can offer free education all you want, but at some point you either throw in the towel or join the bigot and are just as liable. I hate that this fact is true, but it is true. There is only so much we can expect. And then I think kindness should be tried for those who don't know. And the golden rule, I bring it up. And actually, it's interesting because one of the things that I had introduced to a couple of years ago was called the platinum rule, which is not treating someone how you want to be treated, but treating someone the way they want to be treated, right? And that takes open and honest communication about what you need, who you are, and where you're going. And we're very bad at telling each other how we feel. It's a big vulnerability, and a lot of people don't like to do it. So, yeah, there has to be some sort of idea of communication can happen. Let's see. Yeah. And I find that a lot, both talking to other trans people and being in that my gender is under construction as well. I have a really hard time when people want to tell me what my experience is, or that it was just a joke, or that pronouns don't matter. And I've seen that in leftist spaces. Yeah, life is not black and white. But are we approaching communication from a way that gives people chances to learn and grow? And that's a tough one. Yeah, it's not your duty, right? And there are a lot of us from different marginalized communities that have decided that education outside of a very specific spot is not our responsibility anymore. I mean, the resources have been out there for at least the last 10 years, at least, and there's some that are way older than that, but about the life of trans people, about the life of non-binary people, about the life of queer people, about, even the lives of heathen people, right? This is part of the reason we do this show. We talk to heathen people about what is important to them, right? This is a very, very nuanced discussion. And yeah, It is nobody's duty to educate anyone. If you make that choice, fabulous. I will totally help you. Will there be an episode about intersectionality and heathenry? Yes, I really want to do such a thing. Yeah. And also, when you're talking about changing a situation and picking a fight, and I find this often when I'm very tired and I hurt very much because I'm also disabled. I am very bad at picking the fight because I don't have the energy to fight. I'm thinking of, okay, I have to get to this crowd, get to my car, drive to my house, and you want to start a fight with me right now? I've allocated that energy, right? I can't keep fighting with you. But yes, sometimes you at least try to have the fight. Yes, it is always, you can't fix other people. You can't. It is only good when they want to learn and change, right? And that's a choice that they're making, whether they want to. Now, you can always say they haven't been exposed to the information. Okay, that's harder to buy now than it was like 10 years ago when people started using this argument. But it is very important for us. It is very important to know that is where accomplices come in, where they can pick up where you've dropped because you're too tired or whatever. But these are conversations that changes how we communicate with one another. Both being more compassionate, both understanding nuance, and also understanding I'm done. I'm not going to explain this to you for the 15th time. If you don't get it, I can help you, right? Yeah, so we are going to have an episode about intersectionality and heathenry. I am going to put that in there. And I think this one is one of my favorites, and the reason because we know from somatic therapy that emotions, trauma gets caught in our energetic bodies, and as heathens, we believe we have those. And you can say it's part of the soul complex. And if you were interested in checking out the soul complex, Winifred Rose Hodges has written, or it might be Winifred Hodge Rose. Anyway, Winifred. Oh, cool. Winifred talks about the soul complex and the energetic body and how it is affected by trauma. But we know from somatic practitioners as well, people that do body work, that trauma gets stuck, and when you feel unsafe up here, your body thinks there's a tiger, right? The tiger's going to eat you, and that gets caught in the body, and when you have a lot of those things continue to happen over and over and over again, you start getting really twitchy about things that you don't even understand anymore. So it's very important that we pay attention to when people tell us that they feel unsafe. Okay. Someone asked who or what are accomplices. Okay. So back, I think it was Ferguson. And, history check me if I'm wrong, but I think it was Ferguson, where people started talking about being white people, or you know, um, Euro-descended white Americans specifically started to say or try to claim to be allies. Um, but when push came to shove during that series of protests, whether it was the Occupy movement or Ferguson or George Floyd, um, white people consistently dropped out of the fight when it got too hard. Okay, and not every white person, don't get me wrong, but I mean, most of them, right? And there's this fabulous video, and I don't remember. Oh God, I watched it. It was on YouTube, I think. It is a black man at a what looks like some sort of college board meeting, and the police are trying to arrest him, and there are two white young people around him trying to make sure that the cops can't grab him. Okay, and that was the illustration of being an accomplice. You are helping keep that person safe with your perception of privilege, right? Cops don't want to be on tape grabbing cute little white girls on college campuses. Well, they used to didn't. Now they don't really care as much, but that's a whole nother Oprah. Um, um, and yeah. So accomplices are those people who made that decision to protect that person, right? There have been some other sorts of protests and movements that you've had that as well, right? Everyone has sort of a when I used to march in Montana in the 90s for queer rights, there was this little old lady who had on the total church lady outfit. And she would walk in front of us so that the cops were more loath to knock down a little old lady than they were a bunch of, angry college age people, right? Because they were primed for us. They were waiting for us. But this little woman, they were not, right? Again, another example of being an accomplice, using what you have to help others in much the way Reverend Tim was talking about, but it is using your position in society. And now that I'm little lady age, one of my favorite things to do is to, sort of keep a watch out, for do we have 5 cop cards and 1 kid of color out there? Do we have, someone being arrested in a domestic thing? Does that look bad, right? And all I have to do is pull up my phone and tape it. I don't have to get involved. I don't have to do anything. But another way you can be an accomplice, and this is in a lot of upstander versus bystander training. Bystander training was also really popular about a decade ago, where people would learn to go in and help when someone was being assaulted or harassed. Again, most people took the training and didn't actually do it. So they changed that to upstanding, in that they gave you all of these different ways that you could help someone who is in a bad space, right? And I've used it actually, Muslim women, huge population of them in Colorado. A lot of them have moved here for the tech industry that's here. And, but of course, they're very obvious out in the world, right? So when they get harassed, and I've had this happen a couple times, I will step in between and say, are you okay? Would you like some water? Would you like to go, somewhere else, right? And even if the other person doesn't speak English or doesn't speak English very well, the intent is clear. right? What I'm doing is clear, is that I'm stepping between this stupid jerk and this poor little woman that just wanted to buy some food, right? So yeah, that is some examples of what accomplices are. Yes, yes. Accomplices are people. Yes. Um, yes. It has been less true for elders. There have been several, both national and local news about elder people that have stepped in and been seriously injured or died. And that is a question that, but see, they did it for something they thought was important, right? And does that help their family? Gods, I hope so. But it might not. And, we can grieve with their family and, like, may Freya help them and may Air help them with healing and those things. And yes, yes, it is a police brutality problem. It is also a militarization of police problem. And I'm going to show my age here. I grew up in the 70s, and cops didn't have the kind of weaponry they do now. They didn't have the kinds of, SWAT things. They didn't have the kinds of just military surplus, frankly, that they do now. And then the war on drugs in the 80s and 90s. We were fed stories of gang wars, and like we're being fed now. The stories aren't even new, they're just recycled. They just changed the country of where the people were from. But the police are much more deadly now. There's there's a difference in a protest between a one of their nightsticks and an AR-15, right? And I've had both pointed in my face by cops. So it's not just that the people that we're drawing into the police force aren't great. It's also that they're really heavily armed and armored now in a way that they weren't before. So that is super impressive and super important to remember. Yeah. It's weird because I've studied both journalism and history, so I can, and I pay attention to those sorts of things where it doesn't go together well. No, you don't really need a story time with Piper, but that's okay. Yeah, there is. When I was a near reporter, I covered Occupy Denver, and as press, that's supposed to be your magic word, right? I'm press. And it didn't matter to that particular SWAT team member that I was press, even though I was yelling it, and the two people that I was talking to and trying to stand between the cops and them, because it was basically this little lady that had come down to take her son home because she didn't want him to be down there. She saw the SWAT team go down there. She's terribly terrified. So she's trying to get him to go home. I'm trying to help stay between them. And yeah, it luckily they got to slip around me. I'm a relatively big person. But it was still really frightening in a way that dealing with police, because I have, again, my entire adult life, this was the closest I thought I was to dying. It was that day. So yeah, nobody else has to be that dedicated, by the way, just so we're clear. But also, if you can, do what you can with what you have where you are. Like Reverend Tim was talking about offerings, right? Offer what you can. If you are working in anti-bigotry work, do what you can, right? And if you can't fight all the time, tag someone in, right? And that's where we build community. We build people that are safe to do that with. Last questions. Does anyone, before we say good evening and more things for you to think about? Next week's show, I believe, is going to be a panel discussion about our InReach program. Hopefully our guests will be, I believe Lauren Crow will be hosting, but our guests will be Robert Schweitzer, who came up with the program, and Joe Hundling, who runs the program now. And that should be a really interesting show. I am personally, and I say this, covering up my troth thing now, I say this as me. I am an anti-carceral person. I don't think we should, I don't think prison is something we should have. I think it does more harm than good in so many very, very horrible ways. But in that particular space, what the Troth is doing in prisons is really extraordinary. They're bringing the inclusive message to people that they don't get to hear it much. A lot of white supremacist heathens come out of prisons, and we want to give them the resources and the thoughts and the ideas so then when they come out, they don't have to fall back into the white supremacy AFA, ASATRU Federation of America. They don't have to fall into that. They can actually come out into a community that cares about them. We have one of those in our kindred right now, and it's been so fabulous and heartbreaking too, to learn about their experience in prison and how much it changed them and how much heathenry, inclusive heathenry, helped them not feel so strange and so cut off when they came back out. So that should be a really interesting show next week. But yes, definitely do what you can with what you have where you are. I am not nearly so brave as I used to be. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, I'm married. And I love my wife. So yeah. But thank you all for your wonderful reflections and questions. And again, we'll see you next week.